All right, we're going to get started in just a moment. Thank you again to those of you who have joined us. My name is Stephanie. I am the museum educator at Castro of Jewish Museum. We're so excited you're here with us tonight to talk about with some of our very interesting panelists and to hear a little bit about the museum. I'll start with some of that this evening as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can get started. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Danielle.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program, College Campus Communities and Anti-Semitism. We're pleased to have you all here tonight to talk about something that many Jewish college students face every day. My name is Danielle Gaita, and I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a museum education intern here at the Castro of Jewish Museum and a sophomore at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Alongside me today, I have Stephanie Fry, our museum educator, who will now tell you a little bit more about the soon-to-be Castro of Jewish Museum.
Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie. I'm the museum educator, as I had said, as you were coming in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can show a little bit about the museum before we get started. So for those of you who don't know, the Castro of Jewish Museum is in Washington, D.C. and is currently being built. So we are in the process of building a brand new museum that will sit down on 3rd and F Street Northwest, which is right next to the National Building Museum. So when it's all done, it'll look like this. And you can see that there's our little tiny historic synagogue that could, about 2 years ago now, it moved its way down the street on a large flatbed truck and is placed here. And it's really our treasured object, our most treasured object, if you will, of the museum. And you can see there's a modern structure here as well that will connect the museums. We're really connecting the past and the present to tell stories in the heart of the nation's capital that really explore the intersections of American Judaism and American democracy. What I'd love to do is show you a sneak preview of the inside. This is an earlier rendering of the core gallery, which will be one of our permanent exhibition in that modern structure that you had seen. And so there's lots of different areas to explore the different parts of Jewish Washington. So you come in and here you see on the left-hand side, all these tiny little squares. They're actually cubes as part of our identity section, and that's where we really focus on this intersection of identity of Jews and Washingtonians and the other things that make up who we are. From there, we move into a section about issues that really go deep into time and look at the context of where these different issues that we all talk about and debate originated. Moving into this large table you see in the middle about modes of participation and the different ways that we participate in democracy, and the different Jewish movements that have happened in the area, like Soviet Jewry, for example. You can see in the back, there's some map space. That's a map table that's going to allow us to explore the historic areas of DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So you can start big and really dive down deep, and you can see where all the synagogues have been over time and the different businesses that have been owned, and look at all the different landmarks that have really shaped Jewish Washington. And here in the back space, we see this rounded area as a circular table that is a conversation table. And it's really a big heart piece of the museum, where we are here to have conversations with people and to show how our opinions may change over time and how different events have shaped our opinions and thoughts on things. So we're really excited to be opening in about 1.5 years now, and hopefully late spring of 22. And then we've started construction last month. So we're really excited to be sharing some updates as we go along over the next 1.5 years as the museum really comes into a picture for us. Quickly, I'm just going to show, these are some of our upcoming programs. We actually have one on Wednesday evening, so in just 2 days, our big annual meeting, and it's going to be featuring the author of When Rabbis Bless Congress, Howard Mortman, who's also the communications director of C-SPAN, who will be interviewed by Carl Cannon, and that'll be a really great conversation. So I hope that you enjoy this evening and are interested in some of the other things we're doing, and that you'll join us again.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our program tonight focuses on something that is unfortunately not a new phenomenon on college campuses around the country. Levels of anti-Semitism on college campuses are rising, and Jewish students face difficulties each day while pursuing an education. From verbal attacks to physical harassment to vandalism and much more, more than half of Jewish college students are subjected to anti-Semitism. When faced with this hatred and prejudice, it can often be difficult to understand how to make a change in your campus culture. One of the most effective tools, however, is often overlooked. The power that a strong community has when facing adversity is immeasurable. And to speak to that, we have gathered some amazing individuals from all different backgrounds who have an intimate understanding of the great impact that community has and how to build a strong support system, not only within Jewish spaces, but also on a larger scale. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening. Adena Kirstein of George Washington University, Hillel, Rabbi Avremel Vogel of the University of Delaware, Chabad, Isaac de Castro of Jewish on Campus, and Simon Moskovitz of the Georgetown University Law Center Jewish Law Students Association. To begin, could each of you share a little bit about yourself and your background and your views and experience on this topic?
Thank you, Danielle. I'm so happy to be here tonight. I know we are all zoomed out each day. So to spend more time on a screen learning about something of importance and entering this conversation is commendable. So good to see you all and be with you. Again, my name is Adena Kirstein. I'm the executive director at GW Hillel. I've been in the Hillel world for about 13 years and 10 of them have been spent here in Washington at GW. I believe deeply in our community. We have a large Jewish community on campus at GW, about 3,000 undergrads and 1,500 graduate students. They are a creative, exciting, amazing bunch of human beings, and we miss seeing them in the same way we once did, but we are as connected as we've ever been before throughout this unique time in all of our lives. We also, I share notes often with Kara, who's the executive director at the Capital Jewish Museum. We're also getting ready to open a new facility, which is so exciting that these two thriving new hubs of Jewish life will be in the heart of our amazing city. So really proud of our work, and I welcome you all to join us very soon at GW Hillel when the pandemic allows. Danielle asked for a brief thought on kind of how I'm thinking about these issues, and I will frame that in two main ways. Number one, we're always thinking about these issues in a proactive way. You cannot wait for the moment when the swastika goes up or in our instance, the Snapchat incident pops up. We work very closely in partnership with the administration. I have a direct line to the president. He has a direct line to me at the university. We speak on a regular basis with a number of our partners across campus to really think critically about the community, about how we can deal with things when the going gets tough. And I really feel deeply that those relationships have to be nurtured on good days and not on bad ones. So that's number one. And the second thing I'll add is I think we do a disservice to our community if we focus wholly on anti-Semitism, if we stay in that silo. I think a lot of these issues today, and I don't want to diminish the problematic nature of so many of these things, but I will say specifically on a college campus, so much of this is about campus culture. It's about what's happening. It's about this concept of cancel culture, right? Which many of you might be familiar with, where you can't say one wrong thing without being shot down and dismissed for the rest of all time. We really need to create spaces of nuance, of vulnerability to allow someone who maybe doesn't understand, so they can say, I don't know why that's problematic for the Jewish community, or I don't fully understand. In the same way that I think we as a Jewish community need to do some deep work to try to understand others that are maybe not as much like us, but that we want to understand, where are you coming from? Why is this problematic? I don't know enough. Can you tell me more? Right? To speak in a space of vulnerability for us is incredibly important when we think about these issues.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Avremel Vogel. My wife and I, we have been at the University of Delaware running the Chabad here. I think now we're halfway through our 5th year. Delaware's got a pretty large Jewish community. I think we're roughly 12%. There's around 20,000 undergraduates and around 2,200 Jews on campus. So it's prominent, and it's been that way for a long time. Personally, I haven't really encountered much anti-Semitism at the UD campus in our past 5 years, up until this past August. Not 100% confirmed, but I think we can all draw our own conclusions. Back in August, someone had destroyed our Chabad house, had burned it down. Yeah, so that kind of just threw us into a whirlwind that we were not expecting. I grew up in Delaware. It's not something which we encounter every day. It's not something which has really happened here at the university, apart from, the occasional poster and flyer that students like to put up that kind of sends the wrong message. So been dealing with that. And I think for the most part, it may have been just because of the trauma that we had kind of gone through, kind of having the wind sucked out of us, that we weren't able to do a whole lot. But the students pretty much took over, and that's exactly how we kind of like it to be. It's all grassroots, it's all student run, and that's the best way for it to happen. If you want to engage students, having someone, from a place, I don't want to say a corporate place, but have like a rabbi talk to like a bunch of college students isn't really going to change their mind. But having college students talk to college students is really where you can have that conversation, and really what's going to inspire change. And that's what happened. There was an incredible movement that started on social media just from them doing something which they thought was very small. They started to GoFundMe just to help. And I think the original goal that they started at was like $5,000. And it swept. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it was going everywhere for a while. I mean, I'm not really so active on social media, so I don't really know how far the reach was, but I know it was shared all over the place, and people from all over the world, Jews, non-Jews, like, were commenting and sending messages and sending things in the mail and just all of these things. But what hit them was everything coming together. It wasn't just like the act of hate, was seeing how the Jewish students on campus came together. That really showed people, wow, what a way to respond. And that inspired others to kind of have that conversation and want to be there for us as well.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Isaac de Castro. I am currently a senior at Cornell University. I study architecture, history, and urban development, and I'm originally from Panama City. I moved here for college. I'm one of the co-founders of Jewish on Campus, which is focused on fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses and spreads awareness on social media. And I'm the co-host of Jewish Identity Crisis, which is a podcast where I talk about all things Jewish. And I think the topic of this panel is so important. And it's one that I hadn't really thought about in depth until the past few months, when we all had to move online, and I ended up out of nowhere building an organization from the ground up, which I was able to see how uplifting it was to get a group of like-minded individuals working towards a unified goal, in this case, fighting anti-Semitism. And what drew me to the space in the first place was that I lacked a community. I was in architecture school at the beginning. I was in a professional degree program in which I lacked a lot of time. I was not involved in Jewish life. And yet I was hit with this wave of anti-Semitism that's happening on college campuses. I was seeing all the flyers, I was getting the microaggressions in the classrooms and the syllabi. And when I reached the breaking point and I created this organization with other amazing people, and it blossomed into Jewish on Campus and the fight that we're doing today, this support system really changed the way I see community as a tool, and as an empowering tool at that. That is really key to fighting anti-Semitism, in my opinion.
Thank you, Isaac. Hi, everybody. I'm Simon. I am a 3L at Georgetown Law. I'm originally from Tampa, Florida, and I'm the co-president of the Jewish Law Students Association, which we abbreviate and just call JILSA. Just as a disclaimer, nothing I'm saying is on behalf of the views of JILSA or anything like that. I'm a lawyer, so I guess it comes with the territory. I feel lucky that in my life, I haven't experienced overt anti-Semitism really personally. Of course, as a kid, you get some comments, but I've never had any doors of opportunity closed to me, or had to not been given the benefit of the doubt because of my religion or gender or skin color or anything like that. But my family has a strong history of it as well, which has made quite an indelible mark on me, where both my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. My grandfather was in Auschwitz, and my father and his family were asylum seekers to Canada during the 1970s, when during détente with Henry Kissinger, they were traded for some wheat and came to, Canada, North America with nothing. And that's obviously a very difficult lifestyle and something completely different than what I've had growing up, which is something I'm extremely thankful for as well. And so I've been part of a variety of Jewish communities in my life. And like Rabbi Avremel said, I think that a lot of the power of those communities comes from the power of students and the youth. And I think even looking at Danielle, like putting on this program is really incredible and shows a great amount of leadership and a promising future for empowering Jewish students. And I think you'll obviously be a strong Jewish leader for your life. And so these groups have mostly been like youth group with NIFTY, which is a Reform youth group, URJ camp, where I went to Camp Coleman in Georgia, University of Florida, which actually has the highest University of Florida, which actually has the most amount of Jews of any college. It's about 5,000 Jews there. I was the vice president of API, which is the Nationally Jewish Fraternity when I was there. And now I'm the co-president of JILSA. And it's really been wonderful. And organizing Jews can be quite a challenge because it's a very big tent. And in Georgetown, we estimate about 15% of the students are Jewish, but we have every type of Jew, under the sun. We have Orthodox Jews, Reform, secular, agnostic, Reconstructionist, traditional. And so it's a little bit of everything. And the commonality is that we're all Jewish, but there's certain wedge issues that are involved with that become a little bit challenging. And so I think that a lot of the power in organizing and fighting anti-Semitism really comes with inclusivity amongst Jews ourselves. And as a law student, if anybody wants to talk about that, I'm more than happy to as well.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, and to our attendees as well for being here tonight. We're going to open up the Q&A feature in the Zoom. So if you have any questions now or throughout the night, please submit them to the Q&A feature on the Zoom. And to start our discussion, I would like to ask my panelists, how can community be used to counteract anti-Semitism? And what would you say the hardest thing about building community is when faced with anti-Semitism?
All right, I'll kick this off. I'll give a short answer. So how can community be used? I mean, aside to vent, I imagine there are certain things that you can do. So for example, at Georgetown, we had Israeli Apartheid Week last semester, which was, I think, with SJP, which is Student Justice for Palestine. And luckily, we're one of the largest affinity groups on campus because we're a law school, a lot of Jews there. But they probably about like 10, 20 members. And we almost sought out like an active role to get involved in it and understand what they were planning and attending the events. Again, that's something where we had the luxury of being a much larger organization. But something we were even thinking about for semesters coming up was to even seek like co-partnerships and programming with them. Granted, when you have much more overt acts of anti-Semitism, you're not going to be able to have those types of programs. Like reading Barry Weiss's book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism, if someone's calling you a termite and a cockroach, then you're really not going to have anywhere to begin. And it's no use in fighting back and saying how you're not those things, because that's not going to be quite fruitful. And so really one of the best ways to use a community is just by organizing. And that's organizing by using, by having programming and fostering pride within the community for people that maybe growing up did face anti-Semitism or aren't proud to be Jewish, trying to provide programming, provide a community that fosters that pride inside of them. And then obviously organizing with outreach and partnership with other Jewish and non-Jewish groups.
I think that community can be used to counteract anti-Semitism in several ways. Like I said before, a support system is one of them. And when you find that you're not alone in facing this kind of discrimination, it's much easier to feel empowered and to move forward, as well as to process and validate what happened. And it feels less daunting to have hate thrown at you, which is bound to happen, unfortunately, as the environment becomes what it has. But I think that there's a component of a unified voice. Jewish people tend to be silenced or dismissed when talking about anti-Semitism because our current society sees Jewish people as having a privileged position within it. So any discrimination we face is seen as negligible, and at other times it may cancel out what other social movements deem appropriate, like as you were saying, SJP, and Jewish people who fall on the most privileged end on the oppression ladder will get the short end of the stick. So when there are more Jewish people backing those claims, when we can form a unified voice, whether it is with large organizations that have legitimacy behind us or just a cohort of Jewish students getting validation, as we have done in Jewish on Campus before, we have much more of a leg to stand on when we're calling out those claims and asking people to respect and draw our lines. And a lot of the anti-Semitism we see is now guised as anti-Zionism, and this that is plaguing our college campuses now and marketed as social justice. I think what has helped in fighting this bigotry is Jewish students, whether in clubs and pro-Israel organizations, with Hillel, with Chabad, and even with Jewish on Campus online, now that we're all online, is putting pressure on their student governments and their administrations to condemn what we all understand to be wrong. But it can only be achieved in unison, and it can only be achieved when people understand that it's not happening to just you, and you start talking to people who have had the same experiences.
Adena, you go first.
By all means, please.
So as Adena had mentioned earlier, I think it's very important to mention that it's very important for this to kind of be a proactive thing. Reactive is obviously you have to respond, but it's more important for this to be a proactive measure. I'm scared that I'm going to come across a little bit preachy, being I'm a rabbi, and I'm going to say something, but I think from this week's Torah portion, actually, there is a little bit of a lesson for this specifically. You have in the past week's Torah portions, you have the forefathers, you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they were all given different variations of a blessing about their children. And one of the variations is that they're going to be like the sand by the sea. And there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of meaning to that. The sand by the sea really acts as that buffer so that the sea and that the waves from the sea do not overtake civilization. But the only way that that's going to work is not if there's one grain of sand, but if there's a whole bunch of grains of sand, which are independent entities, but they're all coming together. And that's pretty much like what one of the blessings is to Jacob. And you see it in this week's Torah portion specifically, because that's how that's the reference when he goes to see his brother Esau. And that's the blessing that he asks for specifically, because he realizes that coming together and us as Jews coming together, that community, that is the way a bunch of individual entities coming together as one. That is how we're going to kind of keep it at bay and make sure that it doesn't sweep the nation.
And I will just add as a compliment to that, even that, yes, there needs to be that unity and there needs to be a coming together, but we're a community that is rooted. If you look at any piece of, any page of Gemara, there's commentary, right? We're constantly building on the conversation. We're people of arguers. And I don't say that in a negative way, right? We've lived a history where we're willing to disagree and debate, and that makes us better, not worse. And I think we're living through a moment sometimes that we're so polarized that it's like we're not creating safe spaces as a community to have difficult conversations, to disagree, but still love one another in disagreeing. And I think that it's so hard to do that in the wider world, that if we can't even do that as a Jewish people and as a Jewish community, what do we have to do? I also would add one last thing, which is that I think we need to also, as a community, think really critically about what are the arguments, what are the battles worth fighting, what is worth coming together for? Because I always think of this example that someone gave me of a soccer field where there are people on one end of the goal line and people on the other end of the goal, and then there's everybody in the middle. And the mistake that we make in general in life, not just on this issue, is that we scream across to the people on the other side of the field in the hopes we're going to change their minds, and we're not, and it might not be the best use of our time. What about the everybody else's who might, for example, when an issue of anti-Semitism comes up, they're not the ones who are like, I think yes, or I think no. They're the ones who are like, I don't know how to process this. I know I should care. I know I do care. You know, the anti-Israel stuff, the moments that we're living through right now on anti-Semitism, they're not usually about a swastika on a wall. They're oftentimes, you know, I don't remember, I think it was Isaac who talked about microaggressions in a classroom. They're more subtle, they're more nuanced, they're harder to sometimes identify. And if we don't have conversations with that wide swath of people on the soccer field about how did that feel when you heard that? Did it sit well with you? What might not work about it, etc. If we can't have those difficult conversations, the rest of it falls apart. We spend way too much time screaming in the hopes we're going to change people's minds, and we're not. I mean, that's my personal feeling. I think it's a waste of time and it's toxic.
Going off that, Adena, and from a question that we got in the Q&A, one of our attendees wanted to know, how is cancel culture impacting the ability of students to build strong communities when faced with divisiveness and anti-Semitism? How do we continue to allow opportunities for learning and for people to change and form new opinions when the first instinct is to cancel someone?
I want to hear from Isaac on that one.
Yeah, for sure. I think it becomes really hard because this new environment where you can like get canceled for anything provides so much toxicity, and you're afraid of saying what you're thinking. You're afraid of saying something that disagrees, and in many cases it's like being pro-Israel in the classroom is completely controversial. It can even like get your grade bumped or whatever, and we can call that being canceled in this scenario. But when there's that break within the conversation where we're not having a conversation, it's not necessarily education, it's not necessarily learning, it's indoctrination. And it's causing this halt. And I think without dialogue, we can't really form a healthy community. Not only that, but we're completely stifling it and its growth, because people can't find each other. People can't find people who think like them because people are not saying what they think, depending on which environment they're in. And this is happening not only in college campuses, of course, it's festering in college campuses, but everywhere. We see it in journalism, and we see it in so many areas. And I think it becomes really dangerous. And I think this wave of anti-Semitism and this wave of this really polarizing conversation around Israel and around Zionism is like caused by that.
Yeah, I think that Adena and Isaac were both mentioning this, how like the nuance is lost a lot. People get canceled, and the ability to create a safe space. I'm not saying like a safe space from like ideas, but at least a space where people can express their views without repercussions is like very much needed. So for example, at JILSA, we try to stay generally apolitical because we have a number of Jews on campus with differing views, and we don't want people picketing our events. But now, like, come to think of it, like, is that really the stance we want to take? And when it comes to, people being canceled, whether Isaac, it's you in the classroom, it's so difficult because it's a two-way street, because as Jews, like, we're very, at times, like, sensitive to things that have happened to us, whether from the Holocaust or other anti-Semitic events. And so when we see anti-Semitism, real or perceived, but even real, then it's like, it's easy to have a reactionary impulse to want to like silence somebody, whether, I see someone talking about people in the squad, and obviously I don't agree with what they say, but just the lack of nuance has really been a huge detriment to the conversation overall. Or even whether it's the admitted or a known white supremacist going to UVA. I mean, obviously that's a huge issue. I personally think maybe they shouldn't be admitted, but it's definitely, they're like assumptions worth reconsidering.
It's hard. It is so hard. And I feel for my students who want to be bold and stand up against what they perceive as injustice. And it's scary because they don't want to be canceled in the meantime, right? I think it's baby steps, number one. I think it's better listening, right? When you hear of someone else and you think, oh, canceled, right? Like, what are they really trying to say? Where is it coming from? Is this someone you know that you could reach out to and say offline, can we have coffee? I really want to understand where you're coming from, right? These are very simple relationship building techniques of radical listening and trying to, you know, be empathetic, right? So much of this is about empathy. And again, I don't want to diminish the horrible things that people do in this world. I hope I'm not coming off that way, but I think that all of us have a responsibility individually to say, what are the spaces and the places where I can be vulnerable and honest, to model that I know I'm fearful, but I don't care if I get canceled, I need to be honest. And also, where are the spaces where I can give space for others to do the same thing?
Yeah, I agree with you, Adena. I think that it's not the fact that people have opinions we don't like. It's not the fact that people mess up and say things that might be anti-Semitic or might come off as anti-Semitic. It's the fact that we can't have conversations about it. It's the fact that at certain times, the spaces are weighed in different ways. Like, for example, the situation happened at my school, which I won't completely get into, but where a speaker came in who was advocating for the destruction of Israel, let's just put it that way. And there was a message that went out kind of saying that other points of views were being presented. And an entire department within my university said that that was stifling freedom of speech when it was Jewish students who were asking for another perspective, not for the conversation to be shut down. And when I have experienced, like, for example, within this department, the fact that other sides of the conversation aren't being presented. So it's about creating an environment where, whether you're Jewish or not, you can have a conversation and you can say your opinions and not be canceled, not say that you're going to provide freedom of speech. That's saying that providing another opinion is stifling freedom of speech. I think there's something in the culture that's wrong right now that needs to be fixed in the way we have conversations. And it goes both ways. We need to have empathy. We need to understand where people are coming from and understand and listen, because whether we like it or not, some things are just normalized as part of the conversation. But we have to have our side said too, so we can, as we're talking about, have the opportunity to form community and form a healthy one.
Now, I know you guys were talking a lot about creating that dialogue. How do you think community can be used as a tool to help create that healthy dialogue between, you know, two opposite parties in this situation?
I like the example that Adena gave before, and a couple of people touched on it. I didn't know when to jump in. I think like the main time the cancel culture is really going to hit is going to be on one end of the spectrum. It's going to be on one end of the soccer field. And I think the biggest thing, chances are you're not changing a person's mind. I mean, we're not going to get political, don't worry, but I overheard two students who were talking, and I had reached out to one of them around the election time, and I said, hey, how are you? And she really didn't understand because I'm not American, so I don't vote. But she wasn't sure why I was reaching out to her because she was voting for one party, and she assumed that I was part of another party, and she was like, wait, why is Rabbi reaching out to me? And like, for those people, it's like, you just have to show love and empathy, and to force the conversation, like, they don't even want to have it. Like, they think they can change your mind, and they don't think that you're going to change their mind. So I think in a proactive sense, what you really just have to do is really build a strong community before any of these things happen. When you have people who are walking around proud of who they are, okay, from the get-go, not in response. And when we all have like that kind of like line that wakes up when someone yells some sort of a slur at us, no matter how, you know, proud we are of who we are. But when that happens before, and there are people who are involved in the community, you're engaging with other people, you're showing kindness to other people and all of these things, then when someone who's in the middle now hears something negative about you, they're like, wait, I know people who are Jewish and they're not like that at all. So if we're only doing that, like, in retrospect, only afterwards, we're coming up and saying like, oh, look, we're such nice people, and we're really not like that, and we really don't want to just wipe out a whole part of civilization in the Middle East. Like, that's not really what we want to do. They're like, oh, you don't really know what you're talking about. You're not from there. But when they know you beforehand, it's much easier to now have that conversation because there's a bridge that's been built. There's a commonality. They see that you're a human being, and they don't just see you as a human being. They see you as a Jewish human being, and that's not a bad thing because now they see, wait, I know Jews. And I think a little bit of a problem is we feel very comfortable blending in. And I'm not saying that we should go rah rah and start screaming from the top of our lungs, start wearing like our Israel shirts and yelling from the top of rooftops. But the fact that we try to kind of like blend in, people feel much more comfortable saying things, or those opinions aren't going to be challenged. When we're out there and we're showing that we are, and that we're proud of who we are, and that we're involved with the community on many different levels, people start realizing that the stigma kind of falls away. Again, for those people in the middle, I don't think we're going to be changing people on the other end of the spectrum.
So there was another question, and it was about student leaders and how they can have effective conversations with their administration when it comes to anti-Semitism on college campuses, and how to create that correspondence and that connection with the leaders of their institutions, even though they're just students. So if you guys could speak on that a little bit.
I mean, I think approaching your administration with respect and really explaining your situation, I think there's not much to it. I think there's a lot to like the effectiveness of it. I don't know how much to say. I think you get really involved in like or enwrapped in kind of the politics of it all sometimes. I think the most effective way is providing that you are not afraid of the other side, that you don't want to cancel the other person, that you just want to provide another opinion, that you just want to provide another point of view, you want to provide your side of the story. And you want to say your piece, you want to say how an incident hurt you, or why there aren't other points of view presented and why they should. I think coming with the intent of canceling someone is not the way to do it. So always come with the intent of building bridges and opening opportunities, opening dialogue. I think that's the key. Offering opening dialogue respectfully to your administrators is the way to do it.
Absolutely. I think respect and empathy go a long way. I feel so bad sometimes for the president of our university, who is such a menschy, kind human being and just gets screamed at a lot, and I think a really kind letter saying, I know this must be a really hard job, and I know you have a lot of ears, a lot of people in your ear, and I want to thank you for helping to create a space and a community for me. And I want to share just a little bit about something I've been concerned about. That's it, right? These are like basic manners 101 that for some reason, I think because it's a person on a screen, it feels like all the more so right now with COVID, right? It feels so distant that it's almost like we forget that there's another human being waiting on the other end of the line.
Isaac, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm curious, in your situation, again, I haven't really had to deal too much with administration over here about anti-Semitism, just because it really hasn't, in my limited time here, has not really come up. But in your situation, when you had that person who came and was really just talking about, the destruction of Israel or whatever, and being shut down when you had asked to put up other voices, like in that type of a situation, when they're just not interested in having that conversation, how do you foster that?
So I wasn't the one who asked to put other voices. I tend to not get involved in this. I think it was donors and other students who decided to speak up, I can only assume. When I went into the equation was when the department within my department, kind of in the nesting doll situation, said that when this message was put out that other perspectives were given, they were stifling freedom of speech. There were articles put out that were like pretty inflammatory and had some questionable language in terms of anti-Semitism in it. And I approached the administration then, and I approached my worries with my department, saying, listen, I didn't want to shut down this event, but there's validity in the claims that the students are saying that there are no other points of view put up. And I think that them offering another point of view was valid and it was called for, especially in the time that I've had within my school where it's completely one-sided and I've felt completely ostracized, which and othered, which I think is what led me to create Jewish on Campus. So that's when I approached them. And I mean, I had good results. I met with people and they were very kind and understanding, and hopefully changes will be made with it. I don't know, I can't speak on it. But yeah, I think once you approach people, they're open to change. I have yet to see like the process of it. That I'm new to this, even though I'm kind of in the sphere with, you know, a huge leg in the mud or whatever. I'm new to dealing with administrations and this, and I guess we'll have to stay tuned to see what happens. But for now, they have been really receptive into hearing my side of the story.
So another question that we had was, what would you say to Jewish students who are a little wary to enter a community because they're afraid of anti-Semitism, or they believe that, you know, someone is suffering more than they are, so they don't want to get involved? What's your advice for creating community when there's sort of a culture like that?
Sorry, can you repeat?
So in the case where there's a student who's a bit wary of, you know, joining their Jewish community because they don't want to be subject to anti-Semitism, or they don't want to participate because they believe that others are suffering more than Jewish people are, or something like that. What would you say to build that community if there's a campus culture like that?
There's a story that I love to tell. I mean, I think it's an incredibly powerful story. Even more powerful if you know the characters involved. The story goes that Golda Meir, when she was prime minister, I believe at the time Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time they had met, and Henry Kissinger is also Jewish, and they were having a conversation, and Golda Meir, I would assume, was lobbying for favorable, you know, interaction with between the states and Israel. And Henry Kissinger, at one point, he said, listen, Golda, he says, I'm an American, okay? Then I'm Secretary of State, and only then am I a Jew. And Golda Meir, she smiled and she said, Henry, in Hebrew, we read from right to left. And her point was that before all else, like the fact that you're American, I mean, we've seen the threats on Facebook, depending on who's going to win the election, I'm leaving the country. You can absolve yourself. You can kind of divest yourself from your national identity. And Secretary of State, that also. I mean, he's there 4 years, 8 years, however long he's there, and then he's gone. But the point that she was making was, like, this is who you are at your core, is that you're a Jew. And you don't have to identify with your community because there's hate. Identify with your community because this is who you are. And then everything else kind of flows from there. It should feel like a safe space. And I mean, what, you're just going to ignore who you are because other people are suffering more? I mean, how are you going to help somebody else if you can't help yourself? Like, if you don't know who you are, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. So if you want to help other people, get in touch with yourself, understand your own history, and then that will empower you to be able to help others who may have gone through similar things.
Yeah, and I'll add, like, for someone that's wary, obviously being Jewish isn't easy. I mean, even like historically with anti-Semitism, but in terms of some of the dogmatic aspects as well. And so but that's where like finding that pride in people is so important. And it's not easy, but it's completely worth it. And so on campuses, I don't know if where it's like every Jewish meeting is being picketed or whatnot, but there's a lot of activities that are going on. So just attempting to be inclusive and bringing someone into the fold who might not be in touch with their Jewish identity or might not be in touch with their Jewish values. There's so much inherently there, like within that community, that like hopefully that would be enough to have someone like at least want to show up to events or become more immersed.
I also think we do a disservice sometimes when we create this sense of a pain Olympics, right? Like your pain is worse than my pain, so somehow my pain can't be prioritized or vice versa. And part of that, I think, as a community, maybe we need to rethink the way that we're talking about anti-Semitism. It's hatred against Jews. There are hatred against other minority populations. My Jewish value, like if a student came to me and said, you know, I don't know if I feel so proud as a Jew, I feel like I need to go fight another fight. I'd say, like, what do your Jewish values tell, you know, similar to what Rabbi Vogel was saying, what do your Jewish values dictate to you about how you want to help to make change in all communities against all forms of hatred, right? They're not siloed. And I think we do silo them as a society, but we shouldn't be. We need to think about them more, you know, tied in a more intricate way.
Yeah, I think there's the Hillel quote that's like, if not now, and then we often forget like the if not for myself, that comes before. We need to fight for ourselves, and we need to acknowledge that this is happening, that this is a wave of anti-Semitism that's happening, and that what Jewish students are going through, which I can attest to, is valid, and it is worrying, and it is something that needs to be attended to, and it needs to be addressed. And it's always important within Jewish spaces that the leaders of Hillel's or Chabad's really tell their students that it's okay for them to advocate for themselves. It's okay for them to put their own battles as a priority. And other battles, of course, are important, but we need to stand up for ourselves, because at this point we know that we are put, like, again, at the short end of the stick, unfortunately. And yeah, we shouldn't be pitting oppression against each other and all of that, but Jewish people's struggles are valid. What Jewish students are going through in universities right now is valid. If there are any students right now watching, what you're going through, like, you deserve to be able to stand up for yourself, and you, like, other struggles and other things that are happened don't invalidate that. So yeah, I think saying that to students, and of course, as you guys were saying, also don't just join a Jewish community because of anti-Semitism, but because of being proud of who you are, and proud of your heritage, and finding joy in Jewish spaces, which is so important as well.
Awesome. So before we start wrapping up for the night, I want to ask each of you to contribute your thoughts to this question a little bit. If you could say one thing, or tell a student or a student leader or anyone one thing to take with them when it comes to facing anti-Semitism on campuses or building a community on campus in light of anti-Semitism, what would that one thing be?
I'll start. This is more of just like purely from an organizational aspect. So when you are starting, if you're a student, you're starting a community, you obviously want to find as many Jews as possible, which you can do. It's, you know, you either get course registrar, printouts, word of mouth, anything. But especially on college campuses, students turn over a lot. So you form an organization, you have officers within the organization, you have a co-president, president, treasurer, marketing, but there's a lot of turnover within that. And so it's really important to have an organizational structure. So having a mission statement, having first principles that you can always turn back on. That way, when after you're gone, you've created something that other Jewish students within the organization can still fulfill the mission of that organization.
I'll take it less from an organizational stance and more just a heart-to-heart, soulful space. To me, there's no greater antidote no greater fight against anti-Semitism than feeling deep pride in being Jewish. And don't spend as much time screaming against the other. Spend a little more time investing in your own Jewish education, your own Jewish practice, who you want to be as a Jew. Because if you have that sense of pride in your Jewish identity, the rest, there are many, many people to take up that fight and that will help you fight that fight. But in the end of the day, if you're proud as a Jew, that's what's going to make our community successful.
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part. I think, and just to add on that, as someone who's experienced some form of anti-Semitism a number of times in my life, I'm someone who would ignore it because I don't think anything is going to really come from it. So I just move on. Yeah, you hear something down the street, someone throws something at you from a moving car, and you kind of move on. You know, live to fight another day. I think the biggest thing, the most important thing I would say is you can't chase darkness away with a broomstick. You light a candle. That's how it works. You light a candle, you do something positive, and it's going to make it go away just because you're pushing it away. You don't fight darkness with darkness, it's not going to work. Getting into screaming matches and stuff, that's not going to work. Having conversations, I think those are very important things. The most important thing is going to be just doing random acts of goodness and kindness to anybody, and just being proud of who you are. And the stigma and the stereotype and all the different labels that people kind of throw at you, it'll go away. And if it doesn't, those are people that you don't really want in your life. Like, just kind of move on from them.
Yeah. What I would say is, since we're talking about college campuses and spaces that we can't really walk away from, I think holding our people and our discrimination to the same standard that any other bigotry is held, and to stand up for ourselves and to really not allow this to fester. I think what I've seen a lot is Jewish students who, within the last 8 to 9 years, and getting worse within the last 5, know what they're going into. They know they're going into the fire and going into a cesspit of anti-Semitism on college campuses, unfortunately. And what they do is avoid classes. What they do is avoid spaces where they know they're going to face it, or stay quiet for the sake of campus politics, for the sake of campus culture, and just get out with their degree. And I think in order to really get rid of what's going on, we need to form communities. We need to get together and, as you guys were saying, of course, be proud of our Judaism, be proud of our Jewishness and our Jewish identity, but definitely use that pride to fight back, whether it is in administrations or it is student activities, and be loud in our Jewishness and say that we're not going to allow anti-Semitism on our college campuses anymore, and that we're not going to be silent anymore, and that we're not going to be canceled for being Jewish, and we're not going to be canceled for having a connection to Israel. That just can't continue happening, and the way we're going to stop it is if more Jewish students, which usually hold pretty similar opinions on these subjects, start speaking out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So before we end for tonight, I just wanted to give a huge thank you to my amazing panelists. It was really amazing to have you all here tonight. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us. I know that Zoom fatigue is a very real thing, so I appreciate you all coming out tonight. I hope that our panelists offered some valuable insights on how community can be an extraordinarily valuable tool when facing the divisiveness of anti-Semitism on your college campus. And if you enjoyed this program and you'd like to join some more programs with the Capital Jewish Museum, we will be doing an event that takes place on December 2nd called When Rabbis Bless Congress. It will be also at 7 p.m. And if you would like to schedule a group walking tour, so that is for groups, email info@capitaljewishmuseum.org. And that's virtual right now because of what is going on. Thank you all so much for joining. Have a good night.